For medieval wagon drivers, winter travel did not pause when the road ended for the day. Nightfall often brought greater danger than the journey itself. Inns were rare, shelter uncertain, and open ground exposed bodies to wind and frost. Sleep was never about comfort. It was about surviving until dawn. To endure these frozen stops, drivers relied on habit, shared warmth, animals, and positioning, turning brief halts into nights that were just livable enough to continue. Winter travel in the medieval world was never routine, and for wagon drivers it was especially punishing. Roads were not engineered surfaces but compacted earth, rutted by previous carts and softened by thawing snow. Ice turned inclines into hazards where animals slipped and wagons skidded. Progress slowed dramatically, often to just a few miles per day, and careful timing mattered more than distance. Drivers aimed to stop before full darkness, not because they expected comfort, but because navigating frozen ground at night increased the risk of broken axles, injured animals, or lost cargo. Stopping early, however, did not mean safety. Winter halts were rarely planned resting places. Many occurred in open fields, forest edges, or roadside clearings chosen simply because animals could go no farther. Once movement stopped, the body cooled rapidly. Sweat from exertion became dangerous, freezing against skin and cloth. Drivers had to shift quickly from motion to survival mode, reorganizing clothing, checking animals, and preparing for exposure. The uncertainty of each stop shaped behavior. Wagon drivers learned to treat every evening as a test of endurance rather than rest. They measured success not by comfort, but by avoiding injury, illness, or exhaustion severe enough to halt the journey. Winter travel was not heroic or dramatic. It was cautious, repetitive, and slow. Survival depended on recognizing limits and stopping before those limits were crossed, even if the night ahead promised little relief. In winter, the wagon itself became the first line of defense against the cold. Though never designed as shelter, it offered structure in an otherwise exposed landscape. Drivers positioned wagons carefully, turning their broad sides into makeshift windbreaks. When possible, they aligned carts with natural features, embankments, trees, or hedges, to further reduce wind exposure. Canvas covers, if available, trapped a small pocket of warmer air and shielded sleepers from falling snow or frost. Cargo mattered as much as construction. Barrels, sacks, and bundled goods formed barriers that blocked drafts and limited heat loss. Drivers slept close to the wheels or beneath the overhang of the cart, where wind moved less freely. The goal was not warmth, but reduction. Less wind, less moisture, less exposure. Even a slight difference could determine whether a body endured the night or succumbed to cold stress. The wagon blurred the line between tool and refuge. It was no longer just a vehicle for goods, but a temporary wall against the elements. I find it striking how objects designed for labour quietly became instruments of survival. The wagon did not change, but its meaning did. In those winter stops, it stopped being transport and became protection, imperfect, fragile, yet essential in turning an open night into something survivable. For medieval wagon drivers, animals were not only essential for movement, but also vital for survival at night. Horses' and oxen generated steady body heat that lingered in the air around them, especially when wind was blocked. Drivers understood this instinctively. They slept close to their animals, never separating themselves unless forced to. Distance meant colder air, sharper wind, and greater risk of hypothermia. Animals were often tethered on the sheltered side of the wagon, forming a living barrier between the driver and the cold. Their breathing added moisture and warmth to the immediate environment, slightly raising the temperature in an otherwise frozen night. This shared space was not comfortable, but it was effective. Human and animal endurance became intertwined. Protecting the animals meant protecting the journey itself, and staying close allowed drivers to monitor signs of distress, injury, or panic. Sleeping near animals also reduced wind chill. Even without direct contact, the mass of bodies disrupted airflow. Drivers positioned themselves where heat loss was slowest, accepting smells, noise, and limited movement as necessary trade-offs. In winter conditions, separation was dangerous. Survival depended on closeness rather than privacy. This arrangement reflects a practical worldview. Animals were not treated as distant tools but as companions in survival. During winter stops, warmth was shared because it had to be. The line between human need and animal need disappeared in the cold. Medieval wagon drivers did not undress for sleep in winter. Clothing was their primary insulation, worn continuously from travel into rest. Multiple layers of wool trapped air close to the body, slowing heat loss. Cloaks served as outer garments by day and blankets by night. Nothing was removed unless absolutely necessary, because exposed skin cooled too quickly. Dryness mattered more than thickness. Wet garments were dangerous, pulling heat away from the body and freezing stiff in low temperatures. Drivers avoided snow contact, changed layers when possible, and protected their clothing from ground moisture using sacks, straw, or wooden boards. Sleeping fully dressed was not a sign of discomfort. It was a deliberate survival practice. The body adapted to this routine. Restrictive movement during sleep was accepted. Comfort was secondary to warmth retention. Hands were tucked into sleeves, hoods pulled tight, and breath controlled to conserve heat. Every layer had a function, and nothing was wasted. Clothing was not fashion or identity in these moments, it was equipment. Wagon drivers relied on garments the way soldiers relied on armour, not for protection from enemies, but from the environment itself. In winter nights, what one wore determined whether rest was possible at all. Fire is often imagined as the centre of warmth in medieval travel, but for wagon drivers in winter, it was a limited and sometimes risky resource. Firewood was not guaranteed along trade routes, especially in open plains or frozen farmland. Carrying extra fuel added weight and reduced cargo capacity, so drivers used fire sparingly. When wood was available, fires were kept small and controlled. Wind made open flames unreliable. Sudden gusts could extinguish embers or scatter sparks toward wagons, canvas covers, or dry cargo. Accidental fires posed a serious threat, as repair materials were scarce and damage could end a journey entirely. Because of this, many drivers chose to forgo fire altogether once night settled in, relying instead on insulation and body heat. Fire also demanded attention. Someone had to remain awake to tend it, and unattended flames were dangerous. In extreme cold, the energy spent gathering fuel and maintaining a fire sometimes outweighed the benefit it provided. Heat conservation became more important than heat generation. Rather than seeking warmth through flame, wagon drivers focused on minimizing exposure. Blocking wind, staying dry, and clustering together preserved heat more reliably than a fragile fire. In winter stops, restraint mattered. Fire was useful, but never trusted as the sole solution against the cold. Sleeping alone during winter travel increased risk. Wagon drivers understood that shared warmth and proximity improved survival. At night, they clustered close together on the sheltered side of the wagon, arranging bodies to reduce heat loss. Physical closeness slowed cooling and made it easier to respond quickly if someone showed signs of distress. Group sleeping also offered security. Someone waking from cold or noise could alert others, check animals, or adjust coverings. These small interruptions prevented larger problems. The group functioned as a single system, where individual comfort mattered less than collective stability. There was no expectation of privacy. Winter conditions erased such concerns. Cooperation replaced independence and routine replaced preference. Drivers accepted restricted movement and shared space because isolation was more dangerous than discomfort. I find it telling how sleep became a shared responsibility rather than a private act. Warmth, safety, and endurance depended on closeness to others. In these moments, survival was not an individual achievement. It was something built together, quietly, through proximity and mutual awareness. For wagon drivers, the meal before sleep mattered as much as shelter or clothing. Hot food helped restore energy lost during cold travel, and supported the body's ability to maintain temperature through the night. Warm stews, broths, or grain-based porridges were preferred whenever possible, even if ingredients were simple. Heat from food did not last long, but it eased the body into rest and reduced shivering during the first hours of sleep. Fat played an important role. Animal fats and oils provided dense energy that burned slowly, helping drivers endure long periods of inactivity in freezing conditions. Grains added bulk and steadiness, preventing hunger from waking the body too soon. Cold meals, by contrast, offered little comfort and made the transition to rest harder. Eating late in the evening was common, timed specifically to support nighttime endurance rather than digestion efficiency. Food preparation was practical and minimal. Meals were often cooked in shared pots over brief fires or heated embers, then eaten quickly before temperatures dropped further. There was no ritual or leisure in eating. only function. The goal was to prepare the body for hours of stillness in the cold. In winter travel, food became part of thermal management. What drivers consumed directly influenced how well they slept, how often they woke, and how much strength remained by morning. Repeated exposure to cold reshaped the body's response over time. Wagon drivers who travelled through winter developed tolerance not because the cold lessened, but because their bodies adapted. Circulation adjusted, allowing hands and feet to function with less heat. Shivering became less severe. The shock of cold nights faded into expectation. Sleep itself changed. Drivers learned to rest lightly, waking easily to adjust clothing, check animals, or respond to weather shifts. Deep, uninterrupted sleep was rare, but the body learned to recover in fragments. This adaptation reduced panic and conserved energy. Routine played a central role. Each stop followed similar steps: positioning the wagon, tending animals, layering clothing, eating, and settling close to others. Predictability calmed the body and mind, even in harsh conditions. Cold was no longer an emergency, it was a known environment. Over time, the cold became normalized. It shaped posture, movement, and expectation. Wagon drivers did not defeat winter. They accommodated it. Survival came not from strength or endurance alone, but from repeated exposure combined with learned behavior that made frozen nights manageable rather than overwhelming. Sleep during winter stops was rarely deep or continuous. Wagon drivers rested in short intervals, waking frequently to cold, sound, or movement. Animals shifted, wind changed direction, and frost crept across clothing and gear. These interruptions were expected. Sleep was not meant to restore fully, only enough to allow the body to function again by morning. Drivers remained semi-alert even while resting. One ear stayed open for the sounds of animals in distress or approaching travellers. Hands and feet were checked often to prevent numbness from becoming injury. This light, fragmented sleep reduced vulnerability, allowing drivers to respond quickly to danger or changing conditions. Despite its limitations, this form of rest was effective. The body adapted to shorter cycles of recovery, conserving energy rather than spending it on deep relaxation. Endurance replaced comfort as the goal. Morning strength came not from long sleep, but from avoiding exhaustion and illness over many nights. This pattern reveals a different understanding of rest. Sleep was treated as a tool, not an escape. Wagon drivers measured success by whether they could stand, harness animals, and move forward at dawn. In winter travel, sleeping well mattered less than sleeping enough. Wagon drivers survived winter nights not by conquering the cold, but by adjusting to it. Every stop required small, practical decisions: where to place the wagon, how to share warmth, what to eat, and when to rest. None of these solutions were perfect, but together they made survival possible. Sleep became a learned skill. It was shaped by routine, cooperation, and restraint. Comfort was never the goal. Continuation was. Each night was endured with the sole purpose of reaching the next morning. I'm struck by how quietly disciplined these nights were. There was no drama in survival, only repetition. Sleep was not a luxury or a reward, but a fragile pause, just enough to continue moving. This history reminds us that resilience often grows from ordinary habits repeated under pressure. In unstable conditions, people endure not through ideal solutions, but through shared effort and practical adaptation. Medieval wagon drivers show us that survival is often sustained by doing small things consistently, even when comfort is out of reach.